Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everybody to Garden of Doom. This is another great episode with one of our returning guests. This is Mogg Morgan, and he is an expert, I'll say, on all things Egypt, or a lot of things Egypt anyway. He's been on the show before. We did a show probably about 6 months ago, so maybe check that one out. No, definitely check that one out. I've been introduced to him through the Nephilim Anthropology Conference. And those of you who did listen about 6 or 7 months ago will recall that Mr. Morgan actually had not really thought about the overlap before. And it's been 6 months, so we'll probably circle back to that at the end. But the purpose of this show is to go through Egyptian mythology. Yes, when I was a kid, there was an Isis cartoon, and probably most people have heard Ra, Osiris, and Isis and Orion and things like that. And there's tons of stuff attached to Egyptian mythology, and to extent Greek mythology basically copied it, and of course Roman mythology jumped on top of Greek mythology. And there's others too. There were in the Canaanites, there was overlapping religions just with different names. And of course, there's also the legend of Atlantis, which, ties deeply into the ages of Egypt. But I would like to introduce at this point Mogg Morgan. So Mogg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Wonderful. First of all, if you could just introduce yourself to the folks, those who didn't listen to the original show yet, but will, but just to give a brief bio of what you have done, your background, and your projects that you're working on now.
Yeah, no, it's great to be back. Biography, I suppose you'd say, I was writing something today, a writer and a publisher. So I kind of, I suppose, publishing stuff in the area that I like to write, so mainly in the area of the occult and magic and the occult. Personally, I'm interested in, as a writer, in kind of theology, I suppose, but pagan theology, especially from the Egyptian point of view. I've written a few books. The latest one kind of summarizes a lot of work that I've done over the last 20 years, and it's quite handily called just Egyptian magic, really. and it kind of tells you everything you want to know, really, if you want to practice Egyptian magic. So that's quite a good indication of the sort of stuff I'm into. I'm into also into folklore, I suppose, but into Egyptian folklore, which I think is probably an unusual aspect of some of the work that I do, is that I connect it with existing folkloric practices in Egypt today. Which is again is not usual, is the idea that some of the aspects of pharaonic magic do actually never did quite go away. They continued.
What is pharaonic magic?
Well, pharaonic magic, for want of a better word, would be the magic of the period of the pharaohs, which is the word that people use for the kings of Egypt. And of course, that comes to an end more or less with the coming of the Romans. Maybe a few hundred years, with the end of the Roman Empire, especially, and then it becomes Christianity, and then eventually you get the Islamic invasion, I suppose, or the kind of the coming of Islam into Egypt. So you have Coptic Christianity, which is a sort of an important branch of the Christian Church, one of the oldest branches of the Christian Church, really. And in both of those things, they both practice magic, which survives. They practiced the magic, most of the magic. They practice a lot of magic, even in the Islamic world, and the Sufis and the Christians and the Coptics. And it's quite possible to connect the type of magic that's done by those later cultures with the stuff that was done in what I'd call the pharaonic period, the high culture of Egypt. In fact, there are lots of very, very interesting links. And they're still going on today. In fact, I suppose in terms of what the folk do, what the ordinary people do, the empires come and go, but people sort of their concerns remain the same. And so in the village culture, you get the same sort of, obviously there's the thing of tomb raiding itself, and a big kind of thing in certainly in the past in that area. So there's magic connected with that.
I have two questions for you. One is that I know you said that the pharaohs ended sort of with the Roman houses, and it's true that they did, though. How much of an overlap because the end really started with Alexander, because for generations the pharaoh houses they didn't even speak Egyptian, they spoke Greek. Cleopatra, I know, was very popular with the Egyptians because she actually bothered to learn their language, which may be the main reason why she's still remembered and venerated. Now I know what you're saying, that the magic persisted. So, yeah. But the real adoption or prevalent use of pharaonic magic in Egypt and the area, because the borders obviously weren't the same as they are now, sort of end with the Ptolemies, who were the powerhouse there,
I'd say it doesn't really end with them. Obviously, there's this weird story about the last native pharaoh, native Egyptian pharaoh of Egypt, Nectanebo. He was a magician. He's quite a good magician, really. He used a lot of good, he was good at doing magic, if you like.
Right, not like the good witch of the East.
No, not at all. And he used a lot of battle magic then, if you put it that way. So it is okay, because the Egyptian Empire, is under a lot of pressure, right, from the surrounding nations, especially from Syria and or the Syrian Empire and all this sort of stuff. And eventually they get conquered, as I say, and that's, I suppose you could say. So he's the last of the native Egyptian pharaohs, and he practiced magic and divination and studied just the magic, because they know quite a lot about the magic that he did, because it survives in a weird way. Through archaeology and stuff, but obviously he kind of worked out from his divination, from the system that he was using, that the magic, he's had a number of notable successes, really big successes. He destroyed a whole army in the desert, which is weird, but he kind of got to the idea that the end was coming. It wasn't, the magic was going to fail, and Egypt was going to be conquered again.
And so it sounds like in a lot of stories that magic has left the land, right?
Yeah, well, that's right. But the weird thing is he left Egypt, so it said, according to the legend, and he went to Macedonia. And he became a jobbing astrologer in the court of Philip of Macedon. And of course, famously, Philip's wife was very interested in astrology and magic and all sorts of ecstatic cults, and she became pregnant with Alexander the Great in unusual circumstances as a result of some sort of ecstatic orgy, right? Probably. So legend has it that Alexander the Great was actually the sort of descended from Nectanebo. Right, but the wrong side of the sheets, as they would say.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
And so when Alexander did come back, and the Greeks, his Greek army, kind of reconquered Egypt and expelled the Persians. The first thing he did, because it was to go to the oracle at Siwa and say, and get some sort of prognostication about whether the gods of Egypt accepted his presence there. And of course, they said, "Oh, you are an incarnation of the sun god Ra," which, of course, according to their own secret stories, he really was, because his mother was. They say, well, his mother was actually impregnated by the last pharaoh of Egypt. But also it's interesting to see that the Assyrians were much more, they were much more destructive of Egyptian religion than the Greeks, less respectful. In fact, one of the Assyrians actually killed the Apis bull to show how macho he was. He took this sacred animal from the temple and he killed it. And that resulted in them, I suppose you could say, losing it in the end. So Alexander kind of knew all these stories and was quite interested. You could say he knew the propaganda value of these stories. So he made sure he got the Egyptian religion on side by getting this. And maybe the priests themselves thought, we should make sure. Well, it depends what you think. The oracle was very favorable to Alexander the what we call Alexander the Great, and maybe you'd say, well, there's a certain amount of manipulation in that, because they weren't going to kind of say, no, you're a load of crap and get out of our country or whatever. So yeah, I suppose you would say it's not as simple, right? There's a kind of love-hate relationship between the Greeks who eventually come to run Egypt, and I think that actually that period in terms of magic and culture is actually very, very creative. And there's lots of magic goes on for at least another 1,000 years in Egypt, until the kind of, it doesn't really stop. That's the weird thing. It never really stops. People who, well, it's only purists who would say that it stops. It transforms. People go on, yeah. They say, so I just say, people say Hellenistic. There's some sort of criticism. They say, oh, it's a sort of mix of things, but it's actually pretty good. It's very creative. Go on.
I think I'm going to bring you back another time, if you're willing, for a show more on magic. We're getting a little bit far, though. The story that you just told sounds a lot like others. I mean, I guess we could talk about Jesus. You could talk about Gilgamesh, Perseus, Hercules or Heracles. Frankly, Noah. That sounds a lot like Noah, where Noah's father may have been one of the watchers and not, what was his father, Lamech, I think? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a lot of part divine people who go on to be great leaders, but, sort of the whole thing about, angel and divine blood carrying on, if anybody wants to read the Da Vinci Code, we basically,
it's all there. It's all happened before.
It's all
people do it. But I think you're right. You never know what the truth. Partly, people with uncertain origins tend to make up, which tends to be people who warlords who kind of suddenly found themselves running a country, tend to have these quite preposterous, in a way, kind of foundation stories. But who says they're preposterous? I mean, as I say, you have to have it.
Well, North Korea has it right now.
Yeah, well, there you go. People, sorry, who has it right quite now?
North Korea right now. They basically have copied the Pharaoh model and said that
different things, and people descended from the Da Vinci Code. It's the royal family of France, who probably their beginnings are. Everybody's beginnings are obscure, really. To use an Indian myth, no, man's origin is like a river. Nobody knows really where you come from, and so people tend to develop these stories of divine origins. And I'm not going to say they're wrong. I mean, these are extraordinary people. And as I say, in the case of Nectanebo, his magical techniques and stuff, it's something that I do actually study, in fact, because the last magical operation failed when he made this object for this that would normally called the now. It's got a weird name. It's called the Nous of the Decades. So it's a kind of piece of decano. It's the earliest known astrological horoscope in a way. Anyway, it obviously didn't work because it got smashed to bits. And thrown into the sea, but of course, from our point of view, that means that's not the end of it, because then 2,000 years later, somebody comes along and fishes this object out of the waters, and it tells this incredible story. So of its destruction, it was destroyed, the magic failed, but then by weird things, this magic somehow resurfaces again. I find these stories completely fascinating, really. That's still happening. People even that aspect of the magic of the decans, which is an Egyptian innovation that's incredibly old, right from the beginning. It goes into, everybody uses it then. The Greeks use it, the Arabs use it. It's everywhere. It comes into astrology, and it's the same there. We've just had the piece of magic that I really like as well from Egypt is. See, we're talking about elite magic, but there's the folk magic, there's the dance and the shamanic tradition within, for want of a better word, within Egypt, which is also incredibly old. Okay. In fact, the oldest mythology in Egypt, the oldest depictions that you'll find from Egypt are of people dancing in rock art in the desert from very, very early pre-dynastic stuff even. And that
Let me ask you
magic
one question.
it never goes away. Everybody does that all the time now in Egypt.
Let me ask you one question. I'm sorry, there seems to be a little bit of a lag over the Skype. But would an example of the magic, and this is the last thing on magic, then we'll dive into mythology, but is the curse of King Tut's tomb, is that an example of the magic that you speak of?
Well, it's funny, someone asked me that the other day. The curse on the tomb. Obviously, the actual curse, it didn't really affect Howard Carter, because Howard Carter lived a long life and everything. But other people did suffer from that. It's obviously, to some extent, the curse was a bit of a media creation of the 1920s, because the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was a huge media story. It really did sell newspapers, so they kept that going, and to some extent they developed it. But yeah, you'd have to say there is an idea that demons live in those pharaonic tombs. They're even called pharaonic satans, or shaitans rather, that live in the tombs. Presumably they're there from pharaonic times to guard the treasure and the body. And you have to use special precautions, which are documented in Arab sources in order to... It was funny because the Arabs tell you where all the treasure is in these great manuals, and they give you all these rituals that you have to use in order to kind of fool this jinn that lives in the tomb. But at the same time, they're telling you where the tombs are, which is very useful from an archaeological point of view. So yeah, there is something in that, I think. But maybe Howard Carter had such a kind of strong persona, it didn't affect him. Or maybe he knew the counter magic, or whatever. Anyway, it isn't quite as the media states it. Some of those things in the media at the time in the 1920s not quite right. And to some extent, you'd have to say that the whole tradition of the mummies the films, you know, The Curse of the Mummy and all that sort of stuff. It's a little bit archaeological guilt about the fact that they are. The archaeologists are kind of desecrating tombs, really. So the way they get around it is by demonizing the occupants of the tomb. So it's a complicated issue. There's something in it. There's definitely something in it, but there's also an element of guilt involved in that. So yeah, no. There's your answer. I think it's probably true, really.
Excellent. All right. Well, great. All right. Well, let's get into the mythology, and let's start with the sort of the common mythology that everybody is at least vaguely familiar with. And as you pointed out, you found an even older story. So I'm going to let you take over, probably without any interruption. But I guess we're starting with the Egyptian version of the Titans, or the pre-Titans, or the proto-Titans, and then leading to Horus, or whatever the origin story is. So, Mr. Morgan, please take it from here.
Well, I mean, the thing is, Jeff, you're not going to be able to get away from the subject of magic, because all of this stuff is magic is the Egyptian religion, really. And an awful lot of the myths are about the origin of magic, one way or another, and how you do it, and the magical power of all the different figures. So we won't be able to completely put that. We can't avoid it. With Egypt, it's just there. It's always there, in all the stories. Well, I suppose, the most famous story is the kind of monomyth, if you like, what Joseph Campbell called the monomyth about Egypt, which is the kind of family story. In Egyptian mythology, they reckon that it's easier to... The gods usually come in little collectives, they're either in pairs but usually in little family groups. And, that's easier to understand in a way. I mean, there's a question as which comes first. Are the Egyptians, is Egyptian mythology just echoing human society with its kings and queens, or is that an idea that starts in the divine realm? Which might sound a bit weird, what I'm saying there, but actually, mythology... what is a mythology anyway? I'm going to put the light on. Myth is, in my view, in the way I look at this, myth is memory. Myth is another form of memory. People think of myth as something sort of fictional in a way, as something kind of different to anything else, but it actually is. It is some sort of memory thing from a long time ago. So that's the kind of way I'm looking at myth. I actually specialize in something called the archaeology of memories. Make it very grand. Anyway, so you've got what seems like a very old myth, which it is an old myth. It's as old as Egypt itself, you'd think, of this family that develops of these. Well, the funny thing is that you've got the sun god, right? The two major elements of Egyptian mythology, if you like, are the cult of the sun god and the worship of the sun, which is probably one of the oldest myths, really, in Egypt. And the other one is the myth of Osiris, who is the god of the underworld. So it's to do with death, with the mysteries of death. And there's an idea where does religion in itself, or where does any mythology, where does it start in any culture? And one possibility is it starts with the things that happen when someone dies, with sort of rituals that take place. Because in a way, we take it for granted now. Because why? When someone dies, we take quite a lot of care about it. But you can think, I wonder why you do. Why do people? It's a good idea to step back and say, well, why do we bother? Why don't we just phone up the council or the local authority and say, oh, someone's died. Can you come and collect it next Thursday or something? But we don't. It's a very special thing, and it's very important stage in culture when people start noticing that people are taking care over the death, over the dead, and this is developing a myth of another place, of an underworld. So those are the two myths: the myth of Osiris and the myth of the sun god Ra, and somehow or others they get connected together. Or they overlap with each other, and they're very, there's also some reasons why it's difficult to disentangle them as well. But those are the two major myths. And the myth of Osiris is this kind of very, very unusual myth in that you have a god who dies or is killed by his brother or one of the other members of the family, which is the sort of thing that can, as we say, can happen in families, and it certainly happens in Egyptian families all the time, that sort of relatives decided that they wanted to have a go at being in charge, so they kind of they assassinate the person who's supposed to be there. So essentially that kind of happens, and that myth of Osiris. So Osiris is already in a way that the only thing you know about Osiris is that he gets killed. There isn't really any other stories about Osiris of him before he was, not much anyway. It's all in the lead up to this one big moment in his life when his brother kills him. Like the Cain and Abel myth, I suppose people say it's probably parallel to that. And unusually, he suffers this sort of death from his brother. The other gods, his wife, right, the goddess Isis, has to intervene in this process to make sure first of all, he gets a proper burial, but as we know then, to kind of somehow bring him back to life for a short period of time, so that he can engender the next generation, so that the kingship, the succession of kings and queens or within that culture continues, because he hasn't managed to do that at that stage.
So more Jesus than Lazarus.
Well, the Lazarus myth, as I say, that's kind of the Jesus and the Lazarus myth is probably connected with it, isn't it? This idea of somehow being able to bring the dead back to life. It is an idea that Jesus comes back, even if it's only for a short time, or spirit. So Osiris is supposed to be the origin of that. I suppose you'd have to say, so that an awful lot of an Egyptian religion and I'd say magic is focused on that process of bringing the body back to life, and huge secrets connected with that. And that's a major part of the cult, which is funny enough as we'd speak, coming up to Halloween and all that sort of stuff now. And maybe I know this is not going to be broadcast at Halloween, but it's the time of year when they did celebrate this huge mystery cult connected with the god Osiris, and most of the details of that are not known. But you've got these incredible temple structures, underground sort of mystery structures, really, in which he's drowned in one version of the killing, in which they obviously seem to reenact that. Anyway, she assembles all, because he's drowned. Osiris is drowned, but he's also, that's not enough for his brother Set, right, who does this business. He kind of wants to make sure of it, and so he kind of kills him again, or he chops him up into bits and scatters all the bits all over the place and feeds some of them to animals and whatever, all to make it really difficult for anybody to kind of have a proper funeral, basically.
Sibling rivalry.
You know, yeah, but it's a weird process, this, because also the decapitation of the dead. Well, it's obviously in very, very ancient times that's a sort of honourable thing to do. It sounds weird to us, but the people who came before Egypt, they took the body, they did chop the body up into bits, especially the head, and they did all sorts of strange things, rites that we would find quite strange. So in some, it's like I say in Egyptian culture, to give someone a coffin is an honourable thing. It's good to it's to chop them up and give them this funeral. So it's this very ambiguous action. But one way or another, she kind of finds the parts and brings him back to life. And as is well known, the phallus has been eaten by a fish, which is a special type of fish, which is symbolic, another form of the god that's killed him. So I don't think they ever find that part of it. And so there's a sexual mystery there. And this gets raised later as well, because then you've got Horus, who, because he's been conceived in this strange manner, is a little bit of a weakling as a child. He certainly needs the protection of his mother. He's a bit of a mother's boy and everything, and he's always been accused by his uncle, who is still around. You see, having killed his brother, he takes over in the story, and so Horus is a bit like the Hamlet figure, which the Hamlet myth is based on the Egyptian myth, who is not right in the head and kind of a bit weak in the body and not really a good warrior. And they're always pointing out, oh, well, how do you know who his father is anyway? You know, it's a bit uncertain. All right, you're saying his father managed to conceive him even though he was dead by some weird process, and say, oh, well, nobody's going to believe that. So eventually there's going to be trouble, and of course then there's the tribunal scene. Then it's like the wheel of the year, if you like. Then the process continues, and the boy becomes a man, like as Hamlet does, and has to fulfill his destiny, which is to avenge his father and to take over. Which is again, this is a very primary myth, and then that's enacted in mythology, but it's enacted in Egypt in everybody's life. The funeral, it's almost like it's said that during the funeral rites that the son who's responsible for the funeral of his father, when the father dies, his father has to appear to him in a dream and sort of pass the kind of chalice, if you like, of life, or on to him, to say that you are my successor. In one way. Okay.
Well, let's back up just a bit, and let's start with, what is the main panoply? Like, who would be their king of the gods? Who are the major gods under the king of the gods, and what are they? What are they in charge of?
The major god, as I say, the major god is probably the sun god in one form or another, and all the other gods are emanations of his. Yeah. So you would get Ra or Amun-Ra's or but basically there's no one system in Egypt. There are lots of different pantheons or versions of this myth, but they're all a little bit similar of a major sun god who gives birth to a pair, right? A man and a woman, if you like, kind of ancestors, the primitive ancestors, whether that's Shu and Tefnut. And then Geber knew it. Now, for some reason or other, that they're not supposed to. Geber knew it are these famous. This again is refers to the sun and the earth, right? Sorry, not the sun, the sky and the earth. The sky mother and the earth father are the one generation. And the problem with them is, from the sun god Ra's point of view, is that they like sex too much, and they have sex for such a long period of time and such a noisy way that the Ra, the sun god, kind of says, well, you can have sex as much as you like, but you're never gonna have any children. Right? You never have any offspring from it. On no day of the year, right, will you ever conceive. Anyway, they find a workaround. The god Thoth, right, who's very much connected with wisdom and the calendar and stars and stuff, another important deity in the system, gets a workaround for this. he comes to a solution, which is the famous thing. So you've got 360 days in a year, and he says, well, we'll add 5 extra days, and so you can give birth on those 5 days. Hence, 5 other gods have gone, but they are called the accursed gods, the cursed gods, because they're born on the cursed days, and that's Isis, Osiris, Seth, and Nephthys, and another god called Horus, just to make things, Horus the Elder, who is almost like a vampire deity in some. So the 5 gods that people know so well, their beginnings are kind of quite ill-omened in lots of ways, and hence they're the cursed gods, and they kind of fight, and one of them kills the other, and all the rest. But whereas before you'd had these nice, neat pairs of Shu and Tefnut, Geber knew it, just 2, one man, one woman. They have kind of quite an untidy bunch of them, really, to 2 pairs of gods, plus another one. So it's very unstable, very cursed, but very, very interesting and very human in a way. The thing about all these myths is they're very linked with. These are not the weird thing is these are not the oldest myths in Egypt. These are kind of, in terms of Egyptian stuff, but these are newcomers. Even though these things existed, are written about when they made the pyramids, which are the earliest writing. So it's a weird thing. Go on.
Okay, sorry. Again,
I know it's confusing.
I don't mean to be
counterintuitive, isn't it? You know.
Well, it almost is until I'm wondering if there's a parallel. Now, I know the Greek myths sort of, whenever they originated around the same time as each other, but they contain simultaneously in time. But the Greek gods that we know of had their parents, the Titans, who they famously warred against. It's the Titanoctomy or something like that. But even the Titans had parents too. So the Greeks stole a lot from the Egyptians. So I guess if you look at that parallel, it probably isn't that odd that there's an older Egyptian pantheon, though this is the first time I'm hearing about it, but it doesn't shock me. Well, one, because you forewarned me, and I said it in the intro of the show, but I've never heard about any of it. But I'm curious, the major gods in Egypt that we know about, not these older gods, somebody told me, and you know it's Reverend Jim Williamson. He said that there's always sort of 9 major gods. Is that true? Were there 9 major gods in the, I'll just call it the traditional Egyptian?
In the pantheon, I think that I mean probably I've given you about 9. There's about 9 there. You know, if you think about it, you've got Ra and Shu and Tefnut. That's 3, and Geber knew it. That's 5, and then you've got 5 others. So it's about, what's that, 10 or something, 9 or 10. That makes one pantheon, but and those same gods get kind of rearranged into. So I think probably slightly more than 9, really. The Ennead, right? It could, but it depends where you came from in Egypt, really. But so there are other gods, because as I say, that was the ones I've mentioned that are about 9 or 10. Then Thoth has to kind of play a role in that, and then you've got the kind of Ptah and all these other ones and other versions. You could get away with it. Maybe would say Isis has got. You could say that all the goddesses are a bit like her, but probably that's not fair either. So I think you'd have to say there's an awful lot of them, really. But you can simplify it into different pantheons according to the different temples in Egypt, and the story that we've just told is probably the most common one, most popular. pantheon in Egypt, but there are others, that's true. But yeah, you can boil it down to that. I know we always want, but you know, it's the same. People always say that about Indian myth as well. They've got so many gods and goddesses and stuff, kind of simplify it. But then life is very complicated. I think that's what the Egyptians would say. You can't really represent such a complicated system as the world we live in with just such a few deities. You can do the major brushstrokes, but they always have to introduce it. And then you've got, in a way, the nameless entities, all these small entities, the demons, there's thousands of them by name, which again it seems unfair, but that's. The world is complicated. The world is complicated. You can't get away from it, really. But that would get you a long way. That particular system.
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, and I don't want to repeat things on prior shows, so I would commend people to listen to maybe the Sci-Fi and Scripture show with Reverend Jim Williamson, and you can hear what his theory or his belief is and what he says. And before we move on, so. If I remember correctly, it was tied to the number of stars in the constellation Orion, which then pointed to the North Star. And I believe that back then they thought Venus was a star, and that's where the 9 came from. I don't know if there's any truth to that. The other thing, but one thing before we move on that I would ask you to do is you told us that Ra is the sun god. You told us that Osiris is the god of death. If you could just go through the other major gods that everyone knows and say, you know, we all know Athena was the goddess of wisdom, but she was also like the goddess of tactics. And, you know, like they sort of have these gods that have sort of like weird things they're in charge of that seem discombobulated a little bit. If you could just go through what the major gods were in charge of, and then we'll move on to the older story, which is new to me and probably new to 99% of the people out there.
Okay, well, the major gods, I think we kind of mentioned them. You've got Set, right? The god Set, who really you'd say Set is the indigenous god, right? Set is the oldest, is probably the oldest entity within Egypt. Very, very old. It's impossible to say how old it is. But in terms of the story, he has this function of being the kind of, they're all of these major gods are all emanations of the sun god, right? So you could see how you could turn this into a monotheistic system, if you like, a system with almost one god at the top of a kind of pyramid of deities, if you like, if you want to do it that way, because you can say that all the major gods are in fact emanations from the sun god anyway. And if so he creates the god Set as his passion, if you like, his violent side, on the basis that there's a need for that kind of violence, if you like, or that passion and ambiguity, the chaos.
Archangel Michael.
They need that kind of thing. Yeah, everybody needs something like that. If you've got this agricultural cycle in which is another aspect of Osiris, where the agricultural cycle requires that there's a harvest, and that might be the harvesting of the animals that you've kind of gathered. Some god has to be responsible for that process of killing and harvesting, if you like. You could put it that way. Somebody has to do it. Osiris has to die because he's part of the agricultural cycle as well. And everybody has to die. That's part of the natural cycle. Everybody knows that. So that means somebody has to be responsible for that. So so Set has that role of kind of doing the business, if you like. Horus is, we've talked about he's the kind of usually called the royal god. He's the kind of personification of kingship, which again is, and a lot of these myths come. Kingship, the idea of kings and queens, is again not the original way that the Egyptian society was organized. Hence, the myths all have to be rewritten at some stage to kind of say the divine right of kings, and Horus is connected with that. So he's usually called the royal god, and usually connected with the aristocracy and all the rest. Osiris, people say Osiris, I think it was quite interesting, they call him the people's god, a popular deity, because he's to do with the underworld and death, and that is a very, very popular thing. Well, everybody has to die, everybody knows this, so the god of death is extremely popular, and a god of the underworld and of the journey that people take when they die. That's Osiris's role, but that's also connected with the parallel of agriculture, as we've said, of the kind of the sowing, and of the seed from one year is taken to the next year and sown at a certain time of year, and it comes into its own. But sooner or later it has to be cut down, and then you get things like the first fruits and the sign, and the seed itself. It has to be discovered in the underworld. The seed for the next year has to be kind of discovered. All these different things are reflected in Osiris's myth of the underworld. You've got Ra, I said the sun god, but he's also connected with the state itself, i.e. the whole political system. Therefore, the tribunal of Ra, the legal system, that's Ra's role. But also this cycle of birth and death happens in the god Ra as well. He's the sort of model of the human soul, which goes to sleep every night, and some mysterious point we kind of wake up again. So the cycle is repeated every night and throughout the course of the year. But this is also what holds a society together, which is Ra. He's to do with the state. You've got the other gods. Those are the major ones, I think. You've got Isis, of course, as the great goddess, as the major one, and she kind of we'd say 10 other great gods are connected with that goddess. As I say, you got Min, who's extremely old, like the life force, the god of the life force. So it's represented really by the erection, the god who's always erect. And you see that all over Egypt even today, and it's a very popular image there, in fact. You've got Thoth, some sort of personification of wisdom and of knowledge and of the alphabet. You've got Anubis, which is this originally a jackal deity that used to eat the dead, because the dead used to be left in the desert and be eaten by jackals. But once they stop doing that, he becomes more of a protector of the dead, and to do with mummification. You've got Ptah, who is the kind of creator, the creator in the sense of actually physically makes things. We've got Khonshu, the moon god, also very important. Soka, Soka is another underworld, very ancient underworld god to do with agriculture, and I think you're probably getting the idea. You've got quite a lot there, haven't you? Really. And then we could move on to minor gods. We got the god, but let's say the goddesses alongside them. Isis we've mentioned already. Hathor, who's a very older form of Isis, or prehistoric really form of the goddess, whose role Isis takes on, and of course the other great goddess is the goddess of the stars, Nuit, who gives birth. There's the divine mother, the mother goddess, the star goddess, who gives birth to everybody. I think that's most of them really. There's a few other ones, there's probably another dozen. Then you have foreign deities that the Egyptians like. And then, of course, what else you got? You can add deified kings and all the rest of it. But I think that's the main brushstrokes, really. The idea that they come from observing the stars is not a bad idea, really. I think you'd probably end up with more than 8. I think there are more than 8 constellations within the Egyptian star map. But the idea that even the language itself is based on observing it's almost like the cycle, the passion, if you like, the divine passion we talked about of Osiris being killed by Set is played out in the stars, because Orion, which is the god Osiris, but also Horus's son, it kind of one changes into the other all the time. It's not always in the sky. It's a constellation that is said to die in the sense that it disappears from the sky for a long period of time and then it's reborn again. So some people say that that model of the gods coming and going and being born and is played out is something you could actually see in the sky. The constellation Ursa Major, which is always in the sky, is the constellation of the god Set. So that's why sometimes you say he's an indigenous god, and all of the stars together make the body of the star goddess. Anyway, there you go. That's enough.
There's a lot of stars.
Okay, it's a very sophisticated and interesting system that tells a kind of it teaches us a lot about ourselves, especially if you use the system that they use to kind of explore this.
Well, if people, wondering where someone got the creativity for like a show like Game of Thrones, where there was all this court intrigue between major houses and minor houses, and thought it was terribly original. Not to disrespect the story. I think the story's great. I love the books. I love the show until the end. But like you said, this kind of thing plays out in Shakespeare and mythology, and probably in pre-mythology as well.
Powerful families do terrible things to each other.
And then the Habsburgs and the Tudors and the Windsors, and maybe it's still continuing. But anyway, the conspiracy around Princess Diana. But anyway, you promised the Egyptian equivalent. I'll just call it the Titans because I don't know any way better to put it. But let's hear this new information to me anyway.
What happened before all of this? Yes. I mean, that's the weird thing is, even though this story is very, very old, it's found, elements of it are found written on the walls of the pyramids, which are kind of wherever I don't know how you want to date those, but let's say 2,500 years BC, let's say, for the Great Pyramids and whatever, and there's a text there. So that this story is already, and that's the first written records. This story is always already in creation. But even so, it's thought to be a kind of almost, some people say it's not true myth. They say it's not true myth. It's a kind of piece of priestly ideology, priestly spin doctrine, to make way for this new cult of Osiris and Horus and the kings. So people didn't have kings before. The oldest... Strangely enough, right, even in the Atlantis myth itself, the Atlantis myth tells you that the gods were sort of democratic, because they don't fight each other to work out who's going to have which bit of the world. They draw lots, which is sort of like a sort of democracy, really. And that's so. Before all this happened, and this is known from archaeology, really, rather than from text. There was an awful lot of things going on. And funny enough, we talked right at the end of Egyptian culture, when the Greeks and then the Romans were running the show, the Egyptian priests realized that this culture wasn't going to last for very much longer. Their oracles told them that. So they thought they better write down the important stuff. While the Romans and the Greeks were still paying for it. So they built the late period temples that were financed by the Greeks and the Romans, which people often ignore. They record some of the oldest myths. So the priests thought we better record what happened before everything happened. We better record the oldest myths, really, of a time before Horus and Ra and all these other ones, when the names of the gods are not known. Strange enough, so strange if you know this is the nameless eon. It's actually referred to in Egyptian texts on temple walls as the nameless eon, when a previous creation existed. A previous culture existed within Egypt, or another set of gods and goddesses whose names are not recorded, because partly because there was a natural disaster, the evidence of which you can see all over Egypt, in terms of the geology and the archaeology. But it's funny, this natural disaster, this enormous flood probably, it happened at a bad time anyway. It happened at a time when there was this great battle taking place between this previous generation of gods, whose names we don't really know, and they were destroyed in a colossal battle by an entity, by a colossal serpent entity, who does actually play a role in later Egyptian myth, which we haven't mentioned so far really, which is this entity called Apophis, or Apep, although that's unlikely to be their real name, but it's some sort
that sounds Greek.
And she is also known as the mother of all curses. And she was obviously active, right, in the kind of very, very prehistory of Egypt, according to their own records. So this previous creation of an island, which is called the Island of the Trampoline, right, that is named after the battle that took place there. All of this myth is recorded in Egyptian mythology. So they're all destroyed. The previous generation gods are destroyed in a great battle with an ancestor of Apep in a way. And their bodies lie, because they're colossal entities, they lie kind of scattered around the island of Trampoline. And then the next generation of gods, the gods who get the names such as the hawk and the sun god and all that, so they're not even called Horus then. They come and they find the remains of the previous creation, and they can't resurrect it because these gods are dead. So this is funny. The gods have died, but they are still warm, if you like. There's still some sort of energy in these gods, so they are buried under the temples, which, and to some extent, there's some basis in that. The weird thing is that the Egyptians, they had this weird thing. They rewrote their own prehistory lots and lots of times, but they also, if they wanted to build a temple like the famous temple of Philae, of goddess Isis at Philae, and of goddess Satet, who we haven't really mentioned, but the archaeologists show, right, that the temple is actually built on a much older foundation, which is not like the Egyptian temples that we all know. It's much more prehistoric or primeval in its way, much more natural structures. But the key thing is that, and also it's funny enough, the oldest piece of religious iconography, the oldest religious statue probably in the world, but certainly within Egypt, is a statue of the god Min, this phallic god. And this was discovered also under the floor of a temple. So it was obviously something that the Egyptians did. They never threw anything away, they never threw things away carelessly. They buried it under the floor, which is like the very, very ancient prehistoric idea that you bury your ancestors under the floor of your house. And the archaeology shows that this really did happen, right? That there are really these structures underneath the Egyptian temples, and also if there wasn't one there, the Egyptians, just to make it complicated, they made it look as if it was there. So the famous temple of Osiris was at Abydos, has a structure, an enormous ritual structure of very, very obscure and weird usage. But it also is built in such a way to make it look as if, as they were building it, they encountered problems because they suddenly discovered the foundations of an older building. So they kind of have to work their way around it. But there are the sort of remains of very, very old structures there. But the thing that they say is there, this is the double blind with Egyptians. They like to play games with your head. But this particular game of saying that there's something underneath the temple is obviously an important part of their mythology, and that is what a temple is. The temple is, in fact, a structure built upon the foundations of an older race of beings whose names are not known to us, but who invented magic, really. Hence, the magic in practice in temples or in connection with temples is based on the fact that there is something underneath. It's like a black box, I call it. Sometimes it's a very elaborate structure, and part of its structure is the fact that the ancestors are buried underneath the temple. It's a really interesting theme, right? An explored theme in connection with. It is explored to some extent. People have realised that and are always looking for these things, but they don't always like what they find when they find them. So that is the oldest. So Egyptian temples, they're old as they are, they have to be built on this ancient structure, and all religion has to their religion has to work in that way. Anyway, there you go.
I've got a question for you. I'm just calling them the old ones because there's no other name for them. Were they given a name later? And what was the transition between the era of the old ones and the Ra, Osiris, Isis pantheon? Is there any literature or recordings on the pyramids that crossed this bridge? Or do you think that the flood or whatever the natural disaster was sort of just stopped one and then started anew?
As I say, it's recorded in primarily in the Temple of Edfu the Temple of Horus at Edfu, which is a rather wonderful temple, which is completely covered in writing and all sorts of incredible books of various sorts. And one of the books that is kind of written on the wall, which is literally what they did, tells this story. It doesn't tell the whole story. It's extracting it from some old book, by the look of it. And it doesn't tell you. It tells you the name of two of the beings, which are just syllables, really. If I say where they are, you're going to think it's a bit weird. Or two representatives of the old ones, and Wow, there you go. That's what the names are. They turn up and they kind of but they're not the dead. They tell the story. So all sorts of entities turn up. You don't know what the names are, but what you do know is they're not given the names of the later gods. But the later gods, it's almost like, you see, in the story of Noah's Ark, there's this incident in which they're floating on this sea, right? Because, as I say, the battle takes place, this colossal battle takes place in Egypt, and then the flood hits in some sort of prehistoric moment and destroys all the records, and eventually the flood subsides and they find all the remains of the battle. Well, in the story of Noah, they're floating in the ark. And they're looking for signs of land, aren't they? And the first sign of land is when a bird, which is like a Horus figure, a hawk, essentially, though I think it's said to be a dove, but I think you'd say it's probably, in the Egyptian version, it's a hawk, brings a piece of vegetation that shows that the plants must have started to grow again.
Yeah, it was an olive branch, an olive tree.
It was some sort of sign of vegetation, and this would be the same in the Egyptian myth. Something grows, so the land has suddenly re-emerged from below the waters, and reeds have begun to grow, like the sort of flowering reeds, and the hawk, the primary hawk, can land on the reed. So it's the perch of the hawk. But as I say, at that stage, it isn't called Horus. But then later times, obviously, this is a myth recorded in the Temple of Horus at some point. The name Horus, which doesn't mean, for strange enough, doesn't mean hawk. It means face. But that's one of the weird twists of fate. So the famous gods come after this process, after this discovery. This and the design of the temples, the design of all the temples, is kind of based on this. Nobody knew this, right? Why the Egyptian temples look the way they do. They had some ideas. Only recently that archaeologists have discovered that this myth is true of what is at the core of the Egyptian temple. What is the heart of it? Is this temporary structure, really, a temporary reed hut that was built on the island of trampling, or the island of conflict, on the bones, basically, of these nameless entities who exist now still below the floors of Egyptian temples. So yeah, no, I can't really offer you any names, but you can learn about them because that's where the design of the Egyptian temple comes from. And the Egyptian temples do all sorts of weird things. They don't just, it's not just the shape of them. They kind of point at things in the environment. You know, they point at, they're orientated in such a way that if you know the secret, you'll see that it's pointing to something a few miles away on the horizon, which will often turn out to be something that's prehistoric.
So it's not alignment to the stars, it's something else.
It does all that as well. It has alignments to the stars, all sorts of very complicated buildings, and they tell all sorts of stories. They teach you basically all of the temples teach people the mythology. They teach people the very ancient history of the human race from the Egyptian point of view. And they do that by pointing to the stars, but also by pointing to things in the environment that they might not have noticed. Entrances to the underworld, all sorts of things. And exploring the temples, that's how the Egyptians encoded their knowledge to the future, is through that. Because they knew they were coming to an end, but they also knew that they would rise again. You know, because they prophesied that. They prophesied that Egypt, which they call the temple of the world, meaning it encodes the secrets of the world from their point of view. Then put it that way. You don't have to say everybody's world, but it's certainly most people acknowledge the secrets of the ancient history of humanity is encoded in the Egyptian temples and Egyptian mythology, if you know how to understand it. And that's the continual interest of it, because it's relevant. It has lessons for us. I'm not saying I know all of what they are, but it does have certain lessons about the ecology and about life and about how to practice magic, really, how to transcend or to wake up, how to wake up. All of that is encoded in the temples in one way or another. Anyway, big subject of that.
Sure is. You said earlier, a few minutes earlier, that the only names that were known were one syllables, and one was Wa. Do you think that it's a coincidence that the sort of the king of the next pantheon was also one syllable, Ra?
Yeah, well, there you go. So the very ancient language, it just that's true, isn't it? The very proto hieroglyphs are kind of just simple, just a few kind of proto words. I mean, that's it. The Egyptian language is like that. It's what would you call it? It's like an alphabet of desire, to use another thing. It's a set of symbols that kind of somehow relate to natural forces in the people. But yeah, you're right. I thought you were going to say as well that the names of two of the Nephilim are also like that. They're very, very short syllables. I think maybe this is, I don't know. This is also connected with shamanism, I think, and when people go into trance and take strange drugs and do this sort of ancient religious practice, they speak in tongues, and that means, from the Egyptian point of view, they speak in sort of simple phrases that are just very intentional. They're emotions. They're pure emotions in one way or another. But yeah, no, I think you've got a point there.
Yeah, no, I don't actually find anything strange.
Maybe he is named after that entity. It's true. Because those first pharaohs their citadel is the citadel of the Hawk, which is not the citadel of Horus at all. It's about 15 kilometers away from the temple of Edfu, and it's a major prehistoric archaeological site at the moment. But it's a site where there's something to do with the unification of Egypt. And, probably from most people's point of view, if they went there, it's just a lot of bumps in the desert. You need a lot of imagination to bring it to life. But from those bumps and post holes, they realized that what the primitive form of the temple was. Strangely enough, it would be a bit like the Ark of the Covenant type thing. It's a portable shrine, because the people were moving around with this huge portable shrine, like a tent-like structure, and the remains of that are at what they call Citadel of the Hawk in Upper Egypt. But I think the first pharaoh comes from that era. He's a guy who kind of was a warrior. He was obviously a warrior king who is supposed to have unified the whole of Egypt. It was probably just unified the area he was in, which would be enough.
Yeah, I actually personally think that a lot of the things that we encounter, the overlaps with shamanism and Akashic record and spiritualism, souls, whatever we want to do, these are all the same. It's just the words that different peoples use are different and make it confusing. What's the difference between a golem and Enkidu? And also that there doesn't have to be one. Why does there have to be one Atlantis or one city like that? Even in the legend of Atlantis, they were defeated by a rival culture to the east. We have Lemuria and Mu. I mean, you just pointed out that there's an Egyptian tent-like box with magical properties, and there's the Ark of the Covenant. Why need there have been only one at a time?
I think that's true.
I mean, it could be the same thing, or it could be.
The secrets of the ancient world, of course they are. It's the stellar religion, as people call it. The before writing that existed, and you can't sort of just make it part of one, because nation states don't exist then anyway. It's not the same sort of culture that you're dealing with. It's interesting that the Atlantis myth as well, that they're overcome by they're submerged, aren't they? You could say they're overcome by a flood.
Well, they could have been, but they lost a war, and maybe it was the same people from the Veda or what's that book, the Mahabharata and the Vinaya and something. I'm gonna anyway. Enough about that. Yeah. But you touched on a great segue, which was into the Nephilim, and you had told me in pre-production that in this past 6 months, from the first time we met each other to now, you've noticed a lot of different parallels. And since that is sort of my obsession, without actually doing much studying of my own, I would really love to hear, sort of your thoughts and ideas on that. And then I'm going to let you plug all your stuff, because I promised you about an hour, and we've already gone an hour and 10 minutes. So.
Okay, enough is enough, really. Well, no, I think that last bit, that ancient myth, which is called the mythological origin of the Egyptian temple, put it that way. Well, to give it a great big word, the mythological origin of the Egyptian temple, the story of how why there are Egyptian temples, why the first building comes into existence, and why does magic come into the world. That myth, which is told on the wall of the temple of Horus at Edfu, it connects with the myth of Atlantis, of course, but that essentially, I think that is the source of that is the parallel. I'm not saying it's the sort. In a way, the myth of the Nephilim is kind of put together from Egyptian records anyway, in some sense, because the Bible is, or certainly the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek takes place in Egypt. And the sources that they were using at the time would have been sources that they're getting from Egyptian priests, whatever. And I explore that in some detail in the thing. And so if you like, put it, not to take it over and say that that's not a unique myth, but even though you could say there's an equivalent of the Nephilim within the Egyptian pantheon, which are called the Sheb-Tui, which are these ancient giant entities, which we know of as a class of beings called the Sheb-Tui, which means the submerged ones. And the submerged ones, it's not such a big stretch, I think, to go from the submerged ones to the idea of the Nephilim as the kind of the fallen ones. I think it's a kind of similar idea, really. They're sort of somehow out of place one way or another. So yeah, I think that's where I've gone with this now, really. I've kind of thinking of the myth of the Nephilim as essentially recorded in an Egyptian myth, which I always thought that when I first read it. Oh, it reads just like like these old myths from Egypt of the nameless ones. And so I've kind of pieced that together a bit more, really. And they do the same sorts of things. The Sheb-Tui do the same sort of things. They teach magic. Because the process of destruction was the rebuilding uses a different process, right? In order to not get, because you think, if this great entity is going to come along and destroy everything, what's to stop it coming along again? Which, of course, it does. And the only defense against that is the creation of this new technology, which is called magic. And the Nephilim had this role, don't they, of teaching magic to their offspring, basically, one way or another. So there are all sorts of parallels, I think. So, yeah.
Say giants, do you mean?
That's as much as I want to say at this stage until I kind of record it there. But yeah, there's the version of the myth. It could easily have been. Plus, it's the Nephilim sort of functions as the origin of demons.
Yes.
I think that's right. Given that within Judaism they're looking for a way. At the time they're writing that, the idea of demons is taken as self-evidently the case. Everybody accepts it. All cultures around them accept the idea that there's this other class of entities, which the Greeks called demons, and they seem to be interacting in people's life, and people still believe that widely in Egypt, and with all sorts of good reasons. So the story of the Nephilim is, I think I'm right at that stage within Judaism. There isn't that much written until that point about what these entities are. They probably have an understanding of it. So the Nephilim is their version of the explanation of how this other sort of class of beings come into the world of demons, and the utility is they do all sorts of useful things as well as being quite destructive and whatever. So that's what I'm articulating. And there are a couple of other
notes to the audience. There's an episode, I forget which number it is, but it's called Kabbalah, simply. And I found an Orthodox rabbi who's actually from Mexico but lives in Israel, who talked to me about Kabbalah and also did cover the Orthodox position on the Nephilim, so you can listen to that episode. And in a few weeks, we're recording right now October 10th, so I don't know when that show is going to drop vis-a-vis this one, but there's going to be another show with non-rabbinical, but two different very religious Jews who are also going to talk about the Nephilim and angels and demons in Jewish culture. And I have a feeling that they're going to come at it from different perspectives. One is, I think, Hasidic. I'm not sure. The other is very religious, but also, secular. I know them from professions. So anyway, so look for those shows to come, which will come at it from the Jewish perspective. But you can listen right now to the Kabbalah one as well, and it's towards the end. If you're not interested in Kabbalah, you can sort of skip ahead until we move on to sort of the Nephilim and angels and demons and heaven and hell and that sort of thing.
Right.
So it's fun. I love learning about other religions and theologies, and of course I try to compare them all because of what I said earlier. It doesn't always work that well, but sometimes it does. I was trying to ask earlier, but then I realized I was speaking over you, so I shut up. But you talk about the giants, and lots of people talk about the giants, and some people talk about the giants literally, and others it's more figurative, and other it's sort of in between. You talk about the giants, 30 feet, 15 feet. Others you're 7.5, 8, 10 feet, or they're progressively getting smaller as they interbreed more and more with Homo sapiens sapien. But there's also in Genesis they call them the hero, the great men of renown, the heroes of old, something like that. So I'm wondering if in Egyptian we're talking about giants stature, 10, 15, 30 feet high, or just, the warlords, the toughest of the tough.
Look, I think you can find all of those things there. In this one of the records that I looked at of this, written by an Egyptian priest, which is Manetho. He's Manetho. He writes this history of Egypt and a king list and everything, which is the thing that people really use. He often refers to the size of the pharaohs. He says how tall they were, and by modern standards, they're very, very tall, right? More than 7 foot tall, according to his records. So there's that aspect to it. There's an idea that the pharaohs, Ramesses, and all the rest, they're supposed to be tall. I suppose because they're warrior kings and everything. So there's that. There's the whole dynamic of as I say, size matters really within the Egyptian culture. The kind of building of the colossal statues. I mean, I showed an image. If you look at the front of the temple of this temple I've been talking about of Horus at Edfu, there is actually Horus is shown together with the god Set in the form of hippopotamus, which is this enormous creature, which is an avatar of Set, and Horus is shown as a giant, and the hippopotamus god Set is shown as this very tiny little thing. And we kind of think, well, but that's obviously important, right? To depict the size relationship between them. This is an important aspect of the religious culture and the magic. The fact that they do depict so many things of colossal size and so many other things as kind of ridiculously small, so that you definitely get that dynamic. There's an idea that maybe in shamanism or in trance work, this issue comes up. It certainly comes up in magic all the time, the dynamic of large and small, and how to kind of reduce something in size and how to make something bigger in some sort of imaginative sense. So that dynamic. And whilst we're talking about it, you may have seen, it's worth exploring this, that recently, you see, this creature, the Set creature, which is depicted so small, is actually historically, in terms of the geology of Egypt, is actually a very, very large creature. It's a colossal creature. It's almost like a survival of the dinosaurs. And they've found recently the bones of what they call the black bones of Set, which are these fossilized remains that were collected by the Egyptians themselves. There's this weird Egyptians collected fossil remains.
I guess. Was it the carnivorous land walking whale that they found?
That's right, the carnivorous land walking whale, which they wrongly named after Anubis, but it should be Set. It's the black bones of Set, which are stored in temples, in tombs rather. The backfill of tombs is in certain places for ritual reasons are the black bones of Set. And those black bones, which are tons and tons of these things, so much that they don't know what to do and they dig them out. They're not just bones of hippopotamuses, they're fossilized bones of this ancient, enormous creature. So every aspect of the issue of giants, that is a very much a kind of thing that happened when they translated the Bible into Greek.
Well, it's
there. You'll find it there within the Egyptian culture. It's all around them. You don't have to look outside, right, to find why the giant thing is so important in the story.
Well, I could easily see why if they came across these bones, and this was in the Sahara, where you don't think about water, but these fossils were 43 million years old, or give or take. So chances are other people found them, and you could see why the closest thing that they had any exposure to in North Africa and sub-Saharan Africa was the hippopotamus, because even though there were teeth, it wasn't a crocodile, it wasn't an alligator because the legs were too long. It wasn't a rhino because there were no horns. So you could see why the thing they translated it to was a hippopotamus.
Well, there you go. It's some sort of it is an ancestor of the hippopotamus, as far as I know.
Ancestor to us too.
They certainly thought it was. Ancestor of all of us. But whatever. I think there's another interesting issue that ancient people collected fossils. Even Stone Age people, even people thousands of years old, they collected fossils. And put them in a ritual context. They kind of put them in their temples and in their tombs and connected them with this colossal entity called Set.
That's amazing.
It's all there.
I love it. I love all this stuff. It's just amazing. I promised you that we would try to keep it to an hour. It's been an hour and 20 minutes, so I'm a liar. Part of that's on you, but please promote your stuff. Let people know where they can find you, the names of your book or books, your newsletter. I subscribe to it.
You can do that. Well, as I say, I work and run this company called Mandrake, which you can certainly look for the website of that. But the book I really like at the moment, I mentioned it before, I've done the book Egyptian Magic. So that's easy enough to find, isn't it? Just say Egyptian magic. This is kind of me, really. So I think in order to really understand all the mythology and everything, you really do need to kind of study Egyptian magic. But also, it's got quite a lot. I hope a certain amount of philosophy in this, or ideas, not to put you off. Of meaning. I think it's important to think this is relevant. So hopefully, that's my master work. And I've also done a kind of this thing that I call the demonic calendar. And there's a mega version of that, which is the demonic calendar of ancient Egypt. So it's like their kind of ritual year, if you like, the system of demons that existed in. And there probably are more demons than they had gods, really, to be honest. There's so many of them. But anyway, this is a particular astrological sequence of demons, which lends itself to that. So do check that out. And the other books as well. I mean, they say the other major book is, they say, if you want to kind of really get to grips with Egyptian religion, is the book on the Amduat, which we've just done, which is not my work, but I'm kind of quite proud to have published it. Because this really does tell you how.
I just want to make sure that people know what Amduat is. AMDUAT, and it was published by. So yeah,
and that just means what is in the duat, if you like, or what is in the underworld, right? But there's a lot. There's a big thing, but essentially that journey through the underworld.
Well, you just caused yourself a follow-up question, because I know in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Book of Enoch, I think Azazel was the angel that was leading the fallen ones, and I think Raphael was the archangel which was sent to stop him. I'm going to give him a sex, a gender, and he shoved him not in the underworld, but he shoved him in some place called Duadel, D-U-A-D-E-L, and this is Am-Duat. So we've got the D-U-A in both places. That can't be a coincidence.
Well, no, that's it. That makes you wonder, doesn't it? I say that's a whole other ball game, isn't it? Because some of those people were called the Gnostic Setians. One of the most important groups amongst the Gnostics was a group of Setians, but it's not the Egyptian set, apparently. It's a biblical set. And apparently there is no connection between them, but who knows? Right? It's never really been explored that much, but it's certainly tantalizing and interesting material. But yeah, there you go. Exploring the underworld. These are the key things you have to do. But do check out the books. And if you find a website, you can subscribe to the newsletter, so you get to hear about other projects of which there's too many to mention, really, at the moment, including all this Taoist stuff that we've suddenly been fortunate enough to be channeling. Major sort of piece on Chinese medicine, Chinese magic, really, and Taoism that has never been explored in such detail before. So yeah, no, come and join the newsletter and see what's coming. The next one has got a very, very interesting piece by Jan Fries, illustrated journey, yeah, which is quite a treat.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mogg. We're going to keep in touch. We're going to have you on again when the next books are out, certainly if you like. And maybe we'll do an entire show on magic. And I know at some point we talked about numerology as well, but we'll connect offline on that. Everyone, check out his book that he wrote and the books that he published, and certainly check out the Mandrake. It's very interesting stuff. And, follow Mogg wherever you can. He's on Twitter. Pretty responsive guy, actually very responsive. So, I don't know. I thank you so much. And the Nephilim Anthropology Conference, folks, check that out. There's going to be DVDs for sale, and/or they might do it in an e-file. I'm not sure, but Mogg has a presentation there from this year and last year. I think they're both this calendar year. One, I believe, the first one was April, and then this one was October 2nd. So you may want to check those out. But certainly, I guess if you have to pick one, I guess you'd pick the more recent one. And I have very greedy aspirations about the more recent one, because the more people who buy that, the stronger the chances that I get flown to the UK next year to attend, which is not a big deal to Mogg because he's in the UK. But still, I mean, the allure of getting some sort of compensation for something that I think we both love in different degrees is amazing. So help us out, folks. If you don't love me, love Mogg. So anyway, thank you so much for coming once again to the Garden of Doom. You have an open invitation.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. All right. Take care now. And folks, we will listen to you. You'll listen to us next week. I always say see you next week, but you're not going to see me. Take care, Mogg. Cheers and good luck to everyone over there in Britain.
Send them tea.